Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into a fascinating academic paper that looks at economic policy in Egypt. And, well, it asks some pretty tough questions about fairness. We're going to start with a puzzle that really seems to defy basic math. See, since 2018, Egypt's government has had what's called a primary surplus. That just means it's been taking in more money from things like taxes than it's been spending on public services. And yet, over that same period, its domestic debt has absolutely skyrocketed. So what's going on here? Okay, so to get to the bottom of this, the paper tells us we have to do one simple thing. We need to follow the money. Let's go on that journey and see not just where the money's coming from, but maybe more importantly, where it's all going. Right, so this is the absolute core of the mystery. The big question, how did the debt double? But before we can get to the how, we first have to wrap our heads around the how much. The numbers are, well, they're pretty staggering. Get this, 8.7 trillion Egyptian pounds. That's Egypt's domestic debt as of mid-2024. But here's the real kicker. Just 4 years earlier, it was less than half that. So that brings up the big question, right? If the government isn't on some massive new spending spree, what on earth is causing this debt to explode? To start unraveling this, the paper first looks at the official game plan. We're talking about the economic policies recommended by the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, which are really designed for these exact kinds of situations. And here's the textbook approach. It's Econ 101, really. When inflation is running hot, the central bank raises interest rates. The theory is pretty straightforward. It makes borrowing more expensive and saving your money a lot more attractive. All of that is supposed to cool down spending in the economy. Now, the paper points out that the IMF's playbook for Egypt came with these specific conditions. A really big goal was to raise interest rates to attract so-called hot money, that's short-term foreign cash that's just chasing high returns. But at the very same time, the plan involved ending subsidized support for key parts of the local economy, like industry and agriculture. And this is where the paper's analysis gets really interesting. It argues that in Egypt's specific situation, these standard policies didn't just fail to work. No, they actually created this unintended and, well, pretty vicious cycle. And this chart just illustrates that loop perfectly. You can see it right here. Step 1, you hike interest rates to fight inflation. Step 2, suddenly the interest you have to pay on all your old debt, the debt you already had, just balloons. Which leads to step 3, you have to borrow new money just to pay the interest on the old money. And who pays the price? Well, that's step 4. Public services get squeezed. Less money for wages, for health, for education, because so much of it is going just to service this growing debt. And the cost of this cycle is just enormous. The paper estimates that for every single 1% increase in the interest rate, it costs the public treasury 87 billion Egyptian pounds. Now, to put that in perspective for you, that 1 percentage point costs more than all the money they expect to get from selling off public assets in the next budget. Just let that sink in. So there you have it. We've found the main culprit that solves our puzzle. It's not new spending that's doubling the debt. According to this analysis, the overwhelming driver, at least 75% of it, is just the compounding interest being paid on old debt. Okay, so if the debt is spiraling just to pay for itself, that raises a really critical question, doesn't it? Who is paying and who is profiting? Who are the winners and losers? The paper follows the money to find out. And what the analysis finds is basically a system with two very different realities. On one side, you've got the winners, a pretty small fraction of the population with savings in the bank. For them, high interest income is fantastic. It protects them from inflation. But on the other side, you have the losers, the vast majority. Their cash savings lose value every day, and they're the ones who feel the squeeze when public services get cut. They bear all the costs with none of the compensation. And just look at this chart of the budget. It shows the outcome in really dramatic terms. Those domestic interest payments, they're larger than all the spending on government wages and all the spending on subsidies and social benefits combined. The paper calls this highly regressive, which is just a technical way of saying it transfers wealth from the broader population to a small, wealthy few. And the sheer scale of this transfer is, well, it's breathtaking. The paper estimates that over just 5 years,
the total interest income transferred to these debt holders and savers will hit 5.7 trillion Egyptian pounds. That's basically like saying 50% of the country's entire nominal economic growth in that period has been funneled directly to the people benefiting from this interest income.
And this brings us to that famous economic idea you may have heard of, R is greater than G, which was popularized by the economist Thomas Piketty. R is the return on capital, on wealth, and G is economic growth. And this chart shows that, according to the paper, the return on financial wealth is growing much, much faster than the actual economy. And that is a classic engine for driving up inequality. Now, to really frame this argument about fairness, the paper does something fascinating and, frankly, a little unexpected. It looks back thousands of years into Egyptian history for a comparison. And it makes this really provocative claim. I'll quote from the paper here. Pharaoh's lessons on public policy and debt justice have long been forgotten. The argument is that ancient rulers actually had a more sophisticated take on debt justice than some of our modern policies do. And the contrast that the paper lays out is just stark. I mean, look at this. Ancient Egyptian law under King Bokhoris explicitly prohibited compounding interest. It capped how much interest could be charged, and it limited total debt so it could never be more than the original amount borrowed. Now compare that to today's policies, as described in the paper. Compounding interest is allowed, there are no caps on rates, and debt can just grow infinitely. So this really gets us to the core argument of the entire analysis. The author posits that these economic mechanics aren't just numbers on a page. The argument is that when policies protect one small group at the expense of everyone else, and when they reward financial activity over productive work and create this massive inequality, they actively undermine a society's basic sense of fairness.
And here's the final paradoxical twist. The paper concludes that the main tool being used to fight inflation is actually making it worse. By pumping a huge amount of cash, or liquidity, into the hands of a small group of wealthy consumers who are likely to spend it, it's creating a demand shock that, you guessed it, actually drives prices up.
So by following the money, we've gone from what seemed like a simple accounting puzzle all the way to a much deeper question about what the goals of economic policy even are and, who it's all truly meant to serve. The analysis leaves us with this fundamental question. At what point do economic policies violate a society's basic norms of fairness?